Good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of our conference. I think following on from last night's excellent event, which many of you took part in, we should really, first of all, just start with a little round of applause for the Czech presidency for arranging such a wonderful time for us. So. Okay, back to business. So yesterday set the scene for the conference to begin with. We looked at various angles from the whole question of the airport industry. We then looked in more detail at bottlenecks and how to recover from those. And we looked at innovation and smart airport solutions. The theme of ground handling came up many times on the edges of all of that. And today we have a panel to start with which deals exactly with that subject. Just some technical matters, again, to revisit from yesterday. The sessions are being recorded, just so that you're aware of that. And we will be using Slido. And the Slido session that we're in is ASC 2022. And the password for that is ASC 2022 as well. We have separate sessions for each of the panels, and this one is now panel 3. So if you're contributing questions, then it's panel 3 you're looking for. We also realized that one way or another, we ran out of time to deal with quite a lot of questions yesterday, but there were good questions coming in. So please don't be put off, do put them in. Our moderator for this morning has assured me that there will be plenty of time left to deal with your questions. So now, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to the moderator for this subject. This is the Director of People and Operations from the Irish Aviation Authority. Please welcome Jim Gavin.
Dubriano, good morning. It's with great pleasure that I've been given the opportunity to moderate the third panel of this year's EASA annual safety conference. Indeed, it's not only a privilege for the Irish Aviation Authority as the competent authority for Ireland, but indeed it's an honour for me to represent the other NAAs who are with us this morning. And we're going to talk about the topic of innovations and challenges in ground handling. At a time when Europe is preparing its first safety regulation in respect to ground handling, the panel will look at the technological developments that are best to put into practice for ground handling operations. Indeed, we know there is an acute staff shortage in ground handling, and will this be a catalyst to accelerate the introduction of new technologies within Europe? The panel will also explore virtual reality technologies, autonomous vehicles, and green ground handling innovations. And we're also going to hear from our key social partners on transforming the work environment for our people, which was a key message coming from yesterday's session. So, like all the best teams in the World Cup, we have a great lineup. Our panel are experts in their field and come from a variety and varied backgrounds. From the Airports Service Association, we have Fabio Gamba, their Director General. Daniela Modenese is the ground handling chairperson of the European Transport Workers Federation. From industry, we have Swissport and their Head of Global Training, Dave Rogers, who's joined by David Clark from WFS as their Global Head of Health, Safety and Environment. And finally, from the airports, we're represented by Ivan Basato, the Chief Aviation Officer at Aeroporti di Roma. So now I invite our panelists to the stage. Please welcome them with a warm round of applause. Please. So, good morning, Dubriano. You're all very welcome. Before we start off, I just want to lay maybe some ground rules for the delegates who are joining us this morning. We have our panel of experts, and we're going to talk about the various topics which I introduced there. But I also would like for you to engage with our experts on Slido. So I do commit to give at least 20 minutes, and it became very obvious yesterday that there was a lot of really important topics and questions being posed from the delegates at the conference. So I do commit to give at least 20 minutes to you to ask questions. And finally, it is my intent to get us on time at the gate at 11:30 for your coffee break. I do promise I won't play any trumpets. Just a round of applause for our delegates will suffice. So, yesterday we heard loud and clear that, and particularly from the DGCA of the Czech Republic, that airports have a complex ecosystem. We heard from Patrick Key, the executive director of EASA, that the airport is a junction of a number of operations and operators, and they all have their own way of dealing with ground handling. So it really is a deep topic for the delegates. Fabio, as Director General of the Airport Services Association, may I first start with you and ask you, what are the challenges for ground handling?
All right. Well, thank you very much first for the invitation and then for the question. Jimmy, and if I may, perhaps, before I answer directly the question, if I can paint a very quick portrait of the situation in ground handling. And I don't want to spare any comments and perhaps be a bit provocative so that maybe it can set up the stage. So I think it's easy to say, and I think everyone will agree here, that probably ground handling is probably the most undervaluated elements in the whole air transport ecosystem or value chain. And if you're not convinced of this, just look at what happened during the last pandemic, when we've seen that in 2.5 years or so, there have been hundreds of billions, literally, dollars poured into the system. And I think from the authorities going to the help of the ailing airlines, it was just normal. I think there was this thinking of, if we are oiling the whole system by the main cogwheel, the airlines, the whole system will continue. And unfortunately, it's not that simple. We've made a rough calculation at the time, and we realized that out of this hundreds of billions of dollars poured into the system via loans and grants and what have you, less than 2% trickle down to ground handling. So I think this illustrates quite well the picture. So it means that there are imbalances in the whole system. And these imbalances, sooner or later, they will kick back, right? Whether what we have witnessed during the pandemic, where we have lost tens of thousands of workers, is the epitome of this kicking back. I think it's too early to say. We don't have enough hindsight to be able to respond to that. But it's something to keep in mind, and it's certainly a symptom of these imbalances, what happens. So I think I'm going to use a picture to describe a little bit the place that we feel we're in. Yeah. In a sandwich, you have the lettuce, and we feel like we're a bit like the lettuce, and amongst two pieces of bread represented by the airports and the airlines, of course. It's an exaggeration, but the thing is, you will never find the right amount of lettuce in any country or in any station, because it will always vary. And it will always vary because there is no regulation so far. Yeah. Right? We've talked about that amply yesterday. And that's okay, but this is fertile grounds for what you would call best practices and industry standards to kick in. And it happens, as a matter of fact. I think everyone knows here of a number of industry standards. I won't name them because they're quite obvious. And some of them are really, really excellent. And they do work. Yeah. But in an industry that is characterized by liberalization, in the end, the master word, the buzzword of all this is profits, is money. And so it all boils down to costs, driving costs down. And that's always the case. So you may have industry standards, you may have all the best will in the world. In the end, you're run by this, right? And so what happened is that because of this, we are faced to what we call a race to the bottom, right? Now, this race to the bottom, which is taking place today, is having, I think it's fair to say, is having significant impacts on what we consider as our main assets, our people. You know, these people, they're confronted with normally, and I don't want to generalize because it's true that it's somehow different in other parts of the world, but now let's look at Europe and perhaps North America. Most of these people are offered the lowest salaries. Of course, you know the conditions. It's a tough job, tough shifts. And as we've seen, we've lost in Europe tens of thousands of people, in the world hundreds of thousands of people. And they're not coming back, as was said yesterday. So you can tell me, well, now that things are recovering, we can hire again. Sure. We're actually quite used to high turnovers. It's always been the case. Yeah. So that's not really a novelty per se. The problem is, and that was discussed as well yesterday, the problem is that people are not queuing to get in the job. So we have more and more difficulties in hiring people. And somehow, and this is sort of a snake biting its own tail, somehow this is because of the lack of legislation. Yeah. Because these people, skills, experience is not being recognized. Outside of any legislation, these people, they have been sometimes working 20 years because of the cycle of the industry, they're out of business. And if they are lucky enough to find another job in company B after having worked 20 years for company A, they have to start all over again because there's no license or what have you, like you would have a driving license. These things don't exist in ground handling. Okay. So again, it's the snake biting its own tail. So you may say, well, and that's back to the points, innovation. Okay, so let's invent a new way to do this, perhaps with less people and more robots or more automation. And that's all good. And as a matter of fact, on a number of certain fronts, there are already existing technologies ready to, say, do the most difficult, most painful parts of the jobs that people currently do. But there's a but, of course. And the but is, technology, innovation, R&D, all these cost money. And who's going to pay for this? As I said, in the end, the main driver is the profits. It's the financial stability or survivability of the system. And so what could have been done already some time ago or currently is being delayed, sometimes, I wouldn't say indefinitely because we'll have to see, but really hard. And so this is the conundrum that I just wanted to signal. And I think this conundrum is really boiling down to this very question, which is, how can we make sure that the most virtuous ground handlers are being rewarded for being virtuous? Yes. And not being penalized because they are virtuous and hence slightly more expensive? Because that is, to me, that's the real question, and that includes, obviously, innovation. And I will conclude with this, Jim, if I may. Yesterday, Patrick mentioned, his interesting story about 2014 and the regulation on airports, and the fact that he was received with some resistance, to say the least. I think EASA will find a very different perception, a very different reception from the ground handling industry when it comes to the regulation on ground handling.
You're going to give us good news now that it's going to be welcomed, yeah?
Well, welcome, certainly with a lot of interest.
Yes, yeah. Great, thank you. And you mentioned that race to the bottom. That was driven by the EU Ground Handling Directive 96/67?
Well, it was part of this, yes.
Yeah.
It was part of this because I think at the time, and it's always back to the imbalance, it's always related to the fact that if you're looking or listening only to one side, then you're creating a number of issues on other sides.
Yes, yeah.
And I think here it was definitely a request, and it's a fine request. We're all up for competition. Competition is good, and we need it. But competition that is smart,
Yes.
fair, and perhaps Directive 96/67 EC back in the late 90s wasn't conducive to this fair competition that we were talking about. It was only about competition, and that's it.
Yeah, so competition that is smart and fair. I like that. Fabio, thank you so much. Would I just, again, remind the delegates to use Slido. I have it here on my smartphone. Well done to Michael Keat from Schiphol Airport, who was in with the first question. We'll come to you later on, Michael, to answer the question, but I'm going to deal with the second question that was posed by an anonymous delegate. If you could maybe just put your names, that would be really useful for me at the top here, moderating. So, dear EASA, can you specify ground handling? There are namely many kinds of jobs involved. So, just to maybe give us our terms of reference on ground handling. So, according to the basic regulation, EU 2018/1139, ground handling means, and I quote, any service provided at aerodrome comprising safety-related activities in the areas of ground supervision, flight dispatch and load control, passenger handling, baggage handling, freight and mail handling, apron handling of aircraft, aircraft services, fuel, oil handling, and loading of catering, including the case where aircraft operators provide those ground handling services to themselves, as in self-handling. So it's a deep and broad church of topics. Daniela, may I move to you in your capacity as the ground handling chairperson of the European Transport Workers Federation? You know, Fabio has spoken there about the race to the bottom and the impact it has on our main asset, our people. And we heard loud and clear yesterday from the expert panelists the importance and the criticality of managing and looking after our people. What do you see as the challenges in the ground handling work environment for our people?
Well, so thank you for inviting ETF at this very important conference. Well, people are in the center. And as you were saying, an airport is a very complex system, and it's also in a fragmented sector. And at the end, as also Fabio was stressing, the race to the bottom just is intact, also hurts also the safety culture.
Yeah.
So we need to regulate in some way the market. It's good that it's open because this provided more jobs, more mobility, but didn't take care of the conditions of workers. We have this problem of people doing a job for 20 years and then changing from one handler to another, having to restart completely the courses, has to do all the training again, and the work is not seen as important and not seen as very skilled, whereas we know that safety is keen. If you have a skilled worker under an aircraft, it makes the difference. So we think that since this is a really labor-intensive environment, we should focus on people and focus also on the fact that we need to influence just culture. We see that EASA has only 4% or less of incident calling from people from the ground handling, whereas normally they have many more incidents called by people from the other areas of our sector. And this is probably why people don't feel that their environment is caring for themselves. So we need to focus a lot more on just culture and on enabling people to know that their work is important. We think that through social dialogue and through collective agreements, collective bargaining, and keeping people at the center, we can do this. We've been working now, lately, after COVID, this came out very in a big way. We've been working with social partners, with Fabio, and with the other social partners to try to find a solution for this very important sector. And so I have many things to say on this, but I don't want to take much of the time. Maybe I can answer to questions later. But the important focus for us is people need to know that if another crisis arrives, they won't just be thrown out. We have to have longer contracts, so more money in the sector in some way. And I just would say, if Fabio is talking about the slice of lettuce in the sandwich, you figure where the people are. That's even worse. And people are the real asset. So that's it for me now.
But in the context of ground handling, Daniela, like what added value can negotiations bring? You mentioned social dialogue. How can that help operators and the airports function better?
Well, I think that it's keen not to think that you as a one company can just work directly with your people, not having unions involved, because unions are the people, and they talk also to states. They talk also to the institutions. And I can give you a small example of what we're doing now. After COVID, we saw that aggressiveness rose a lot. And EASA has been doing a great job with the EASA campaign against unruly passengers. This is becoming a real problem also in ground handling, whereas in the past it was more related to intoxication for alcohol on board. And now it's like aggressiveness on the ground, maybe due to all those different restrictions we had, and also mask wearing, long queues, distancing, QR codes, whatever you had, different states. Even if the Commission tried to put a one mean for everybody, every state had its own. So you had to have a lot of documents. And we've been working with EASA on this. And as unions, I have an example from the airport I work in, which is Bologna Airport in Italy. We had to strike for sure at the beginning to raise the awareness, but we worked with airport, with the ENAC, so the national authority, and the state, just to try to find a solution. And now we do have a small solution. We have a protocol. There's a way in which people that have a problem at the gate or at the check-in can directly call for help. And there's a way to solve it and to make all normal passengers feel fine, because a safe environment is safe for everybody. We don't want these strange people coming up and jeopardizing the flight.
Yeah.
You know, many times you have other passengers coming to you. It's easy to scream to a young girl working on a front of house because she won't punch you back. But this is really bad. And our people don't find that the work environment is safe anymore completely. So they could be fired very easily. It's not so safe. It's not delivering normal work, you know, just giving boarding passes and talking to people. It's also having to cope with this. This is why I think that as ETF we are promoting social dialogue at all levels.
Yes, yeah. Disruptive passengers is interesting. As a director of the Competent Authority for Ireland, we definitely have seen an increase in occurrence reports from the operators in terms of disruptive passengers. With this new regulation coming in, you mentioned just culture, that's the psychological safety where we can all feel safe to advocate our position. One would hope that ground handlers will be able to engage with that safety management system, and I know it's part of the architecture of the new ground handling regulation, that they can report these incidents that they might see. But from the European Transport Workers Federation, What's your perspective on the regulation? Surely we've enough regulation in aviation. The last thing we want to do is introduce a raft of regulations and put the chains on the workers that you represent.
No, it's not putting chains. In this case, it's really working to set some standards that can be acknowledged by all, and then can set also a minimum for everybody. So we welcome it, and we as ETF have been working steadily on rulemaking tasks. So also we have groups working, we have people inside, and we really think this is, it's not that a regulation is even more a problem. We think that regulation can regulate the market better,
yes.
so help re-regulate, if I can use this term. It's been a race to the bottom, as Fabio said. We've been experiencing this. So bad conditions, lack of just culture, problems to hire people. Where do you find people? If people think that this job is for 4 months or 5, they will just go to another place, like a logistic. E-commerce is so easy now. They will gain a lot of money for 4 months and then leave. Our industry needs people that stay and then conduct their work also alone. I mean, they don't need every day someone to tell them what to do because they know what to do.
Yes, yeah. I find it really interesting. You're speaking really, Daniela, that the idea that the airport is an ecosystem, that everybody has, it's a big team, but everybody has a part to play. It sounds like we've forgotten about one of the big parts, and which are our ground handling. And we spoke yesterday about the aerodromes regulation that's now in force. We have recent regulation, EASA regulation covering, European Commission regulation covering the air traffic ATM and ANS. I think this is the last piece of the jigsaw in some respects. So thank you, Daniela. And talking just about the regulation, Dave, as the global head of training for Swissport, you've been in the industry, I'd imagine, 30 years?
30 plus, yeah.
30 plus years. So you've seen a lot of change. You've seen the introduction, as I mentioned earlier on, of that the ground handling directive of 96-67. You're seeing now new regulation coming into force shortly. So as Europe prepares for its first safety regulation for ground handling, could you tell us about your experience of technological advancement in training?
Absolutely, Jim. And first of all, I need to say, and listening to the previous colleagues' comments, I'm really delighted and excited about the forthcoming regulation, because up until now, ground handling has always been the Cinderella. We've always worked in the background, doing this, doing that, but never really invited to the party. Under regulation, we won't be here as guests, we'll be here as a part of the ecosystem formally and have a formal voice. So I'm really looking forward to it. And I want to thank EASA in their basic regulation, AMC and GM and everything that's coming, that it's technology agnostic, it's neutral. It allows for us to adopt some of the innovative things I want to talk about, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, can we shout that out? We're excited about regulation. Is that okay?
I'm sorry to bring this to the forum, but I am excited about it. It's
And David
for me, it's
Cinderella.
possible. So, whoever has the clicker thing,
Yes.
please press that. I've got a nice little movie to talk to you a little bit about what innovation's starting to show. And let's see if it works. So, virtual reality. I don't want to talk, I want to just make the differentiation between simulators, hardware, that it's very expensive, difficult to move around, and you need big infrastructure to do it. I'm talking virtual reality with some headset and some driving techniques. We apply this to pushbacks. It's really good because we can have these simulations. At a press of a button, I can turn it into night. I can make it rain. In the middle of summer, when I have time to train people, I can make it snow. I can make a wingman jump up and down and go, stop. I can do all these things and record it. All of a sudden, during a pushback, I can make an engine burst into fire. and allow our ground people one of those human factor things, the dazzle and startle moments. I can allow them to experience that sudden shock. It's brilliant, Jim. I can make all these happen at a time and place of my choosing. I exposed a very senior pushback trainer for a very large airline to this. And he was sat with the goggles and the steering wheel at a desk in the middle of an office in the middle of nowhere. And he said, "How are you making the chair vibrate?" I said, "I'm not." He said, "You are, I can feel it." I said, "You can't. What you're feeling is what your mind is telling you." It's fantastic. So as we go forward, these are the things that we're going to be adopting. That may not sound massive innovation to yourselves, but from my side, it really is. It's something new to us in ground handling. Why? Because we can. Delighted that the regulation will enable this to be used where possible, and we want to do more of this. We piloted this back in late 2019. That's a number that will remind everybody forever how the world changed. So in 2019, everything stopped in our world. Airlines stopped flying, no business, and all the challenges. So we're introducing these things more and more. Now, this is a safety conference. So here's the thing about virtual reality for me, Jim. This gives me the opportunity to allow people to practice safely. It allows me to say, "Jim, I want to test your capability." This has telemetry checking on it, so I can check your score. I can score you on the time, the direction, the control. I can put critical failures in here that if you fail to do this, so at any point, you can check yourself. We can do this anywhere. Now, one of the things I've been hearing about is sustainability, environmental. Well, guess what? I don't need to drive a pushback tug. I don't need to ask an operator for permission to play with their aircraft and start engines and burn fuel. I can do this in an office. I can do it in a comfortable office for our workforce. I can give them opportunities that may not exist. So it makes a small contribution to greening our activities. And the other thing that really, really does help us about this type of thing is when I want to do pushback training, I need three things. I need a pushback tug, I need an aircraft, and I need people. When I've got an aircraft, it's usually being turned round. My people are busy. When I don't have an aircraft, my people are available, but I don't have an aircraft. This allows me to have all three things in the same place at the same time. So that's the virtual reality.
Yeah.
And then the next bit we're looking at is, hello? Yes, right. So this is augmented reality. So here we are. You are now wearing goggles and you are stood with this person and he's talking to you. It's in a dangerous area. And you can look around 360 and have a look where you are. And guess what? As you're watching this, I'm watching where you're looking. So if you're looking all over there, where the action's here, I can talk to you and say, "Hey, focus on this, please." So from anywhere in the world, you can be on this work site, this construction site, standing there, listening and interacting with the person. So all of the things that a person would not normally get to see and do because they're not there, we can bring them into this place. And you can do this with simply a mobile phone in front of your eyes, and it virtual 3Ds it. And again, you feel there, you can interact, you can record these scenarios. It's brilliant opportunities, and we're starting to get there. So I just wanted to say how excited I am to be here, how wonderful it is to share what you probably already know more about than I do as airlines and regulators. But I'm excited. I'm excited for our workforce. I'm excited to be able to bring this forward to make them feel something special and to give them opportunities to practice and be able to react to things. But that's just a little touch from my side, Jim. if that's okay.
That's fantastic. Can I have a go?
Yes, I'd love to let you.
Great.
But there's much more to that.
So all that training that we see here that Chris Sport are doing, like in the current regulations we have, like to get your Part 137, to get your Part 66 license, airworthiness, we've got ATOs for your flight crew license, we have competency training for ATCOs, or air traffic controllers. How do you see the regulation? Are we going to have certificates for our ground handlers, or how do you think that will work?
Well, I'd look at it and say, if I want to check somebody's competency on a pushback, I can use the simulator to demonstrate that they've achieved the required set of competencies in a parameter and go, there you go, there's evidence. I should be able to show my regulator that on request and say, this is how I manage the competency of my people in the workplace, and I can do it in a variety of situations.
Yeah.
So in the middle of summer, I can demonstrate that we're prepared for winter operations with snow. There'll be more. We've just looked at pushback because that's high safety risk. Eventually, there'll be more operations. There'll be cargo forklift operations. There'll be de-icing, et cetera, and more will come. And we'll be testing the value of this as we go along and looking at how it moves the needle for us.
Yeah.
So,
You're on the rule-making task force for the ground handling regulation.
yes.
You are. Okay, so do you see it like that we're going to certify? Daniela spoke about the respect for our people and giving them their sense of place in the aviation ecosystem, which is really important. So are we going to certify them as ground handlers? Is there recurrency training? How's all that going to work?
Well, we're really lucky because we've got some good industry standards sitting out there from IATA. And you go, okay, what that helps us do is it helps us understand what needs to be trained, what the syllabus is, how it shall be maintained.
Yeah.
And you go, as a certifying or as a declaring entity to the regulator, I will say I have to meet these standards. And here's how I do it, so I can evidence that this may be part of this framework.
Yeah.
I may be able to do it.
And so we've got a question here from Andrew Badham, who mentions that, and thanks, Andrew, that in April 2023, ICAO will issue a state letter which will include STARPs for ground handling. We already have an ICAO doc on ground handling.
Yep.
You mentioned IATA. Now we have the European regulations for ground handling. How does that all blend in together?
It all blends in really well. Everything is quite aligned because the Manual on Ground Handling Doc 10121
That's it.
Feeds nicely and informs the airport handling manual. That doesn't deviate. And EASA look to these standards and say we have one true north. And that's brilliant that we have one true north that we're all steering towards. One standard. So it means our employees can be trained for any company to one standard. That means it makes it really easy for that social mobility of an employee when the work moves from company to company to transfer that across and not leave the industry. We've all seen what happens when people leave our industry, Jim, in airports, in airlines, in ground handlers. This is going to help sustain our system, our employees, and help them value the work they do.
Yeah. And as you said, as a safety conference, it will enable a safer work environment for the people and for the operators.
That's the intention.
Yeah.
And that's what the expectation is as well.
Yeah. Great. Well, Dave, thank you so much.
Thank you.
David, as the global head of, and you have a big remit, health, safety, security, environment for WFS, that's a broad portfolio. Dave has told us about the virtual reality. From your perspective, what innovations or automation are you seeing in ground handling?
Thanks, Jim. And just to echo Dave's comments at the start, thank you to EASA for the invite today. I've been involved from the airline side 20 years and now 6 years on the ground handling side, and we've always had very good collaboration between the handlers and airlines over years through EASA, through IATA. But it's really nice to now be forming, for me, new friendships, new relationships with regulators here and also with with our airport colleagues. So thank you for the invite, first of all. And then maybe secondly, for those who are not familiar with WFS, because we're not the brand name that you see out your window every day in terms of ground handling. I think I had yesterday a few conversations, and some knew WFS, many didn't. We are one of the larger ground handling companies globally, but we're heavily geared towards cargo handling. So we're in about 165 airports around the world, predominantly in North America and in Europe, but 80% geared towards cargo handling, which is why you don't often see our logo outside the window, with the exception of Spain. And I think our colleague from Spain yesterday was talking about the great work the teams there are doing on bidding for the new licenses in Spain at the moment. So we are large, 30,000 employees around the world, and we have challenges, as all ground handling companies do. And what I wanted to do in this sort of introductory section was just to outline a few of the practical challenges and some of the technological solutions that we're working on within WFS. And I want to emphasize that, the solutions, it's not, everyone has challenges. It's really about how we work together to solve them. So a few sort of practical examples. And I won't labor on this one because I couldn't possibly do it justice in the same way that Dave just has. But we too are looking in terms of VR and augmented training tools. And just to add a very practical example to some of the points Dave alluded to a minute ago, we struggle with ensuring competence, and it's partly because of the turnover issues that we've discussed already, and it's partly because of the practical challenges that Dave's outlined about access to real equipment, and particularly to those, and I like the term, the startle effect moments. We just do not get the opportunity to, in a realistic way, test that our colleagues have gained the competence and the confidence to, especially in emergency situations, to do the things that we think that they're going to do. And we've experienced this in WFS this year on more than one occasion, and I'll just use the example of moving an aircraft or marshalling an aircraft either onto stand or towing it. On 3 occasions this year, we have experienced where we have a full, correctly qualified team guiding an aircraft onto a stand, and we expect the person in the wing walking position to put their hand up and to stop the operation if a hazard develops.
Yep.
And on 3 occasions in different airports, they did not do that. Equipment in a hazardous position continued to allow the aircraft to either come on stand or to be towed onto stand, and a collision occurred. And you think, how can that happen? And when you think about it and you investigate it, these are often very junior members of staff, the person driving or the crew that are taxiing on, very senior members of staff. Maybe it's a bit of that kind of hierarchy gradient. They must know what they're doing. It must be okay. Yep. I'm not going to put my hand up. So with this technology, and that's actually the chap on the left-hand picture is our North America safety security head, and actually a former CRJ and 737 pilot. That's him experiencing some of this technology, and it really does deliver for us the opportunity to throw in a real-life example of a hazard developing and test that people will actually react in the way that we expect. So that's really powerful stuff. And then moving to more of our kind of more familiar domain, and I should say I didn't mention although we're heavily weighted towards cargo, we still do have a sizable ground handling operation. I think we're nearly 500,000 turnarounds, predominantly in the US, but cargo is everywhere for us. Cargo warehouses are our kind of big domain, over 200 of these around the world, and over 2,000 forklifts in operation around the world. And I am the forklift, I don't know if the forklift geek is the right word, but I'm the guy that never stops talking about forklifts. amongst our leadership team because I hate them. I hate them. They're a necessary evil. They're our biggest personal injury hazard in warehouses, and I like nothing more than when we find ways to eliminate them, and we do find ways to eliminate them. We, particularly in warehouses where perhaps we're supporting an e-commerce customer, and the package sizes are perhaps smaller, and we can move to ways of working which don't involve these heavy forklifts. So you can move to pallet jacks and to other less hazardous pieces of equipment, but we can't always do that. And we move helicopters, we move classic cars, we move pallets of iPhones. You have to use them. So where we do use them, what we're beginning to now look at in terms of trialing is autonomous forklifts. And I think for me, this is a great way where we can set pedestrian-free zones. We can really sort of reduce the exposure to that hazard for the people that do have to work in the warehouses. So that's a nice technology. Early days, I have to say it's early days, but that's an exciting development. Another cargo sort of focused development on the bottom left. So those of you that are familiar with cargo processes will know that we have to weigh and we have to dimension. So it's weights and dims, it's called, of cargo shipments. And weighing is kind of evolved into the 21st century. We do have weight sensors on forklifts that can wirelessly transmit weight to cargo systems, so you reduce the risk of weight errors, which obviously is a flight safety risk. But dimensions is still a kind of a stick or a tape, and way back in the sort of last century. So there are now technology providers who can set up systems with LiDAR and with CCTV, and all you need to do is drive the shipment through a certain area and it will calculate the dimensions for that shipment. So it's efficient and it's more accurate, and that's what we all want. So that's another exciting development we're looking at. Bottom right, this is a piece of technology that's actually been around for a while that IATA developed, called the DG Auto Checker. So again, anyone that's involved in cargo will know the painful process that our people need to go through every time a dangerous goods shipment arrives. Looking up the book. So the book is kind of your door. If you're a bit short, you can stand on it to get a bit higher. It's a large book of dangerous goods regulations, and we have to look through that page by page to make sure we follow all the safety rules. And IATA developed a fantastic bit of software which will automatically run that for you. The problem is it's ahead of its time, and we are so slow in cargo. We are not even in the 21st century yet in cargo. And a small anecdote on the sort of paperwork problem in cargo. The average number of pieces of paper that are used for a shipment of cargo, pieces of paper, is 8 pieces of paper per cargo shipment. It's probably the single biggest challenge we have in cargo. We are moving slowly to electronic dangerous goods paperwork, and that will really revolutionize this piece of technology that IATA have developed, because it will be fully automatic. But a nice piece of technology that we are using. At the moment, you have to optically character recognition scan this dirty piece of paper that's been across 3 borders in a truck in the back pocket of a driver, and try to sort of automatically read that. So that's where it falls down at the moment. But again, nice piece of technology that's solving issues for us. And then finally, just to remind everyone that technology does not necessarily mean electronics. And also innovation doesn't necessarily mean reinventing the wheel. And so I will be brief, Jim. This is just to illustrate a lovely trial that we've been running for the last 6 months in France on one of the biggest safety risks our customers tell us about, which is the carriage of lithium batteries and undeclared lithium. So we've worked with our long-term partner in security, ICTS, and some of the canine explosive detection vendors, so specifically a company called Diagnose in France. And we have managed to, through their outstanding trainers and their outstanding dogs, June and Ronnie are the names actually of the dogs, we've managed to train a dog team or 2 dog teams to detect lithium. and it's incredibly accurate. They have passed every test that we've done over the last 6 months. We have now launched an operational trial with a big customer in Charles de Gaulle. We haven't found any undeclared lithium in that trial, but every test piece that we've hidden in these shipments, the dogs have detected. And it's not the whole answer to this industry problem, but as the largest cargo handler in the world, we felt we needed to step up, innovate, and that's just an example of where you can kind of recycle technology into a new application, and we're excited to see how that might develop over time.
For the airlines and the carriers, this is a big safety concern. I know Qatar is the number one. The number one safety concern is lithium batteries. Can you tell the delegates where you're trialing this?
Yeah, well, so as I say, we initially kicked it off in Lyon, in France, partly just practically because that's where the available dog team was, and our expert was also based there. And for practical operational trials, we've moved it to Paris, Charles de Gaulle.
Okay.
And we're running it there since October, and we're planning some more trials and expanding it out to another 1 or 2 of our larger customers there. We're also talking, and I'm sure there's DGAC representatives here, we are talking to our DGAC colleagues and other regulators about it. And in fact, there's a presentation at the European DG Liaison Group in Warsaw later this month, where we'll share a bit more details on this. Great.
Well, David, thank you for that. Your perspective from the WFS, the Worldwide Flight Services, do you see that this you're on the rulemaking task force as well? Do you see that this rulemaking task force again will inhibit innovation?
No, I mean, I think as Dave says, to make it technology agnostic is the way forward. Yeah. I think there's other pitfalls within the way that rules can be written, which inadvertently might limit technological advances. Yeah. But I think, as I said at the start, it has been a collaborative exercise. We've been invited in from the start. I've only joined it more recently since the pandemic, but it's a collaborative exercise, and we can kind of critique that language to make sure we don't inadvertently introduce rules which will limit technological innovation. So I think there's the chance to do that.
Patrick Key, the executive director of EASA, mentioned yesterday that when the air drones regulation was introduced, there was a bit of a pushback from industry. You've mentioned the engagement that EASA have had with industry. What's your perspective when this is rolled, and the opinion is published, but what's your perspective now when this is rolled out? How will industry respond to the regulation?
I think it will be a big change for us. I mean, having said, those of us in cargo are used to being regulated on the security side. Yeah. But it will be a change for many of us. We will take time to get used to it. Some of us are used to it already. Spain already, effectively regulates ground handling from a safety perspective. But it will be a big change. I think the critical challenge for everyone is gaining consistency, particularly for those of us that operate in multiple member states. We do not want a situation where one competent authority interprets in a different way to another one. Yeah. And we do absolutely get that on security. We absolutely have that where we can secure a shipment with dogs in one country and it's perfectly legal. And you cannot do the same thing in the next door neighbor country. Yes. Because they don't allow that. And the weird thing is you can actually secure it in one country and truck it to that other country, and then it'll still be legal to fly from there. Yes. So we get some crazy kind of inconsistencies on security. And so I would really welcome, that we have consistent application and lots of dialogue after the publication so that we maintain that consistency. Yeah.
David, thank you very much. The good news is that we've got a nice tailwind pushing us along, so I think we're going to get into the gate on time, which leads us nicely to Ivan and the Chief Aviation Officer at Aeroporti di Roma. From the airport's perspective, bringing all this together, our social partners, representative bodies, the ground handling providers themselves, what's your perspective as an airport operator in terms of the ground handling context that we've just mentioned?
Well, thank you, James. Thanks to EASA for the invitation, but most of all for raising the level of the attention on the ground handling sector in our industry. And it's great that we can participate, bringing the perspective of the airport to this panel. I prepared a few charts, very few slides, because we need some visual support if we can put them on top. We still don't have them, Dave? Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, ground handling in Rome is no Cinderella. Okay, ground handling in our airport is, I would say, an essential core part of our operational setup. And why is that? Why is that? Because we still have bad memories and scars from the past, from a time, let's say by the end of the first decade of the century, when in Rome we used to have 8 ground handling companies, about 7,000 units of GSE active on the ramp, huge social and business instability in this sector, with all the consequences of a situation that was not stable at all. So this reflected very badly on the quality that we were delivering to the passengers in Rome, and the loss of reputation for the airport, and I would say our positioning in relation to the customers and to the passengers was not good at all. So we needed to change this. At the beginning of the last decade, we reviewed all the options, and together with the Civil Aviation Authority, we developed a safety case, a very robust safety case, showing that a limitation on the number of ground handling licenses was necessary by using provisions that are in the European directive back from the 1996 and the national legislation. So we decided, together with the CAA in Italy, ENAC, to limit the number of the licenses at the airport to 3 for third-party providers and plus 2 self-handlers. That happened in 2014. 2015, international competition, tender, and we could award 3 licenses, the title to operate to 3 operators, which participated to the competition and bid an offer that was not based on price, because price for ground handling services is a matter of negotiation on the free market between airlines and service providers, but it was based on the commitment to certain quality levels. It was based on the business plan. It was based on the resources that they were going to make available at the airport, people and equipment. And it was ultimately based on their industrial experience. We started in 2016, May 2016, for a period of 7 years. 7 years is the maximum that actually you can limit the licenses in the current regulatory environment. Of course, it's the same in Italy. And this term will expire next May 2023. What results did we have? Dramatic improvement of the service quality, dramatic improvement of safety KPIs, main safety KPIs, no more bankruptcies. Okay? Before that, we had every 2 years a ground handling service provider was exiting the market. Before that, we had a huge social instability. We haven't seen anything like that since 2016. Despite the pandemics, despite the crisis of the airlines, despite the crisis of Alitalia, despite many externalities that could affect negatively the sector. So we established in Rome, I think we were successful in establishing in Rome a legal framework, a new legal framework relying on the laws, on the European Union directive, but also on special legal requirements that were introduced thanks to the limitation and thanks also to the tender that was made. That made the system much more stable. And to use the terminology that the other colleagues use, made less likely that the race to the bottom of the market could provide negative effect to the whole ecosystem and to the whole system. The most important thing about this legal framework is that the ground handling service providers that got the title to operate in the airport, they did have it because they committed to quality.
Yep.
Okay? So now we have contract in place. The airport and the ground handling service providers have contract in place which make legally a contractual binding the SLAs between us and the ground handling service providers. If the ground handling service providers, their performance is monitored monthly, if they do not meet the targets, of course they can have penalty fees apply. It's a continuous review process of operations and performance between the CAA, the airport operator, and the ground handling service providers based on the contract that actually brought a huge improvement of the service levels. Just a few examples here on the charts, because normally, on average, quality improved by 40%. Wow. Okay? And we are talking about the time to redeliver baggage, the time that is necessary to bring passengers from the aircraft to the terminal and vice versa. And the number, for example, of ground handling delays, the number of ground handling delays was more than half. This is a EASA conference. This is the annual safety conference. This is the most important safety conference in Europe for safety. The safety KPIs improved almost by 50%.
50.
You see on the top, on the bottom right corner, I mean, we have many of them and we monitor many of them, but the aircraft ground collision decreased by almost 50% before and after. And the number of vehicle-to-vehicle collision diminished by 41%. Of course, safety management system is a continuous improvement business, and we cannot say that you achieve total safety. This is never applies to our industry, but for sure this was the right thing to do. And ground handling is no Cinderella in Rome, because the big improvements in the performance of the ground handling is actually underpinned the overall performance of the airport. Yep. This is the most important customer satisfaction index that is monitored in the industry. It's the EASA Europe Airport Service Quality Survey, which is absolutely, say, the highest attention for us. And you see that in 2016, we introduced the limitation on the ground handling licenses, and this is one of the reasons, not the single reason, but this is one of the reasons why the red line, the satisfaction of the passengers for the services in Fiumicino, Rome Fiumicino, started improving so dramatically, and Rome Fiumicino is now on the top since 5 years. And it's recognized by many, many international awards at this stage. So now the 7-year term is almost expiring. We decided with the CAA that the safety case, we reassessed the situation this year after the pandemics. There is still a very robust case for keeping the number of the licenses limited. I mean, we didn't cancel the market. Okay? So no huge complaints by the airlines in the last 6 years. The market is still an open market. Ground handling service providers compete for customers in Rome Fiumicino. Okay? It's no monopoly. We have 3 of them plus self-handlers, no more due to the transformation from Alitalia to ITA, but in the future they can be back. So the world has changed since 2016, and now we are introducing new criteria that are absolutely important for the development of the ground handling operations in Fiumicino. For example, sustainability in the new tender that is out since November becomes a big factor, will play a big role. So we will ask the ground handling service provider to bid on quality, but to bid also on their will to align with our sustainability strategy. Okay, as an airport, we were quite, I would say, ambitious, and we committed a few years ago to have a net zero by 2030. Okay, it means that we need to implement a lot of initiatives. Many of these are connected to the ground handling sector. So, for example, we will ask the ground handling service providers that are going to bid for the title to operate between 2023 and 2030 at Fiumicino to commit to a certain number of electric vehicles in their fleet at Fiumicino by certain time milestones. For example, by 2024, we will ask to have a minimum of 20% of their equipment that is going to be electric or HVO because there is also a non-electric way to sustainability, which is by introducing not biofuels, but HVO is a new generation of fuel. It's hydro-treated, and actually it can allow the reduction of almost 90% of the emission of CO2, even with a conventional vehicle. And the HVO is already available in Rome Fiumicino, so we are using it. And there are two ways for the fleet. This is a big innovation to be fully sustainable. If you can rely on electricity generated with the renewables, of course, electric vehicles is the way forward. But if you don't have that option, maybe you can get a better result in terms of sustainability if you use HVO. So this is what we are going to introduce in the next 7 years, and we plan in order to be net zero as an airport by 2030, to have 100% of the ground service equipment active in the airport, converted to electric or HVO by 2028. The lessons learned from our case, in our opinion, is that it is necessary to have a multi-year perspective, okay, to create stability and long-term partnership for the ground handling service provider. So healthier balance sheets, a regulated competition, actually bring up preconditions for sustainability, service quality, safety, very important, and social stability of this organization. Okay, maybe in the second round of a question, I can provide a bit more details on the innovation part, because there is also a lot going on in that
Yes,
domain
yeah.
in Fiumicino.
Okay, thank you, Ivan. We're talking here about stability, long-term perspective. How can this be achieved in the current regulation, the regulation that we will see?
If the ground handling service providers have in front of us 7 years,
yes,
okay, where they are sure that the rules in use, in force at the airports are predefined, and the picture is clear. They know the performance that they have to deliver. They know there will be these 3 operators actually competing on the market for such a time frame. They can support their business much better. Okay, so they can get more resources from banks, for example, financing resources. They can rely on their planning, their financial planning becomes more credible, it becomes more reliable for a period that is not very, very long, but actually it's a lot in this sector. So you can invest in fleet, you can invest in training, you can invest in technology, and you need to have an airport operator that is ready to support you also, because many times we, the airport, introduce new technology, even in the ground handling sectors, and we ask in a participative way, in a collaborative way, the ground handling service provider to get on board. Okay? This happened many times. In the past, we introduced, for example, let's go to here. These are things that we are doing at the airports as part of our open innovation framework. So we have startups and also scale-up companies that are introducing innovation supported financially at the beginning by us, but basically in the ground handling setup of the airport. And this is to demonstrate that really ground handling is no Cinderella.
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much. Well, good news is it's 10:10. We're at top of the cent. We're on time. So please stow your tables and put your seats in the upright position and put the safety belts on, because we're now going to move on to our discussion from the audience. I'm going to hand control of the Slido questions to the mothership, to EASA, the EASA team. So they're going to propose some questions for me with 20 minutes to go. So the first one I'm going to jump into, though, I'm going to take the liberty as they get that set up, is we're going to go to a question from Michael Keith from Schiphol. I'm going to ask you, this question for you, Fabio, from the EASA perspective, are you in favor of a limited number of ground handling concessions at airports? Just to put you on the spot.
Yeah. It's a dangerous question because, and I think from what we've heard, especially from Ivan, I think the answer comes automatically as being yes, but. And let me qualify this. I mean, we have seen in the past airlines where there was a total liberalization in the ground handling service. Yeah. And I know of a few airports where you have more than 8. It was going up to even more than 10 in some North American airports.
10?
Yeah. And that brings, obviously, huge pressure, and the only remaining factor at the very end is how many contracts can you secure, to the detriment of good sense, because what you want to do is to make sure that you can eliminate your competitors simply out of the markets, and so you're willing to go even down your margins and do the job for a loss, basically.
Yeah.
So it's not functioning. That's not proper competition. I think when I said smart competition, that's what I had sort of in mind.
Yes, yeah.
Every airport is different, of course. Every station is different, and this has to be factored in somehow. There are ways to do that, but I think there is merit in limiting this to what the station, the markets at that station can sustain. So it's really smart and sustainable competition.
Okay. Smart and sustainable competition. Dave, you want to get in there?
I'd add to that, if I may, Jim, because Airport de Roma, bringing it to 3, we see some airports around the world where there may be 10, 11 ground handlers, and there isn't physically enough space for the equipment of 11 ground handlers. That doesn't support safe operations when there's just not enough space to park equipment. So the logic that we've seen there, Airport de Roma, and the things that go, well, actually the social conditions around fighting for contracts, there is a balance to be made.
Yeah.
And it can enhance safety, as proven. Thank you.
The next question I'm going to jump to is a question for you, Dave. The forthcoming regulation, this one from Marco, the forthcoming regulation applicable to a handler will probably bring a new and additional requirements to comply with. How quickly handlers will adopt their model? How could they comply with, considering the issues handlers are coping currently with? Lack of staff, high training, high turnover, etc.
What a good question. We're already faced with that. Nothing changes. Yeah. We're already faced with lack of staff, training, and to a standard. This is the important bit. It starts to bring in a standard. That's a good thing. That's a positive thing. It brings transferability. It brings a better level of safety because everybody's trained to the same level. Now, the regulation, well, the regulation is basing itself on good industry standards already and saying, hey, here's what you should be meeting. The majority of ground handlers out there are already meeting or aspiring to meet these standards. So that's a good thing. The ones that are oblivious to the standards, that's going to help raise their game. There's a saying that the rising tide lifts every ship. And that's what's happening. The tide is rising. All the ships will lift to a level. So I'm saying it's those of us that are already working towards it, we're in a comfortable place. Those of us that aren't are going to have to start to do this, and that's a good thing for all of us, industry-wide, sector-wide, and Cinderella shall go to the ball.
Yeah.
So good question.
Thank you for the answer. Daniela.
Just to add on this, when we were talking about re-regulating the market and so not putting competition out, but this is one of the things. So less competitors on a limited space is better for safety. It doesn't mean it has to be one, but I think we should look in this. And this is also why we think that the industry as a whole has to work on it.
Yes.
Protocols.
I was just going to add on the question about the forthcoming regulation. I mean, don't forget, well, first of all, as I said earlier, you know, we are already regulated in some domains, so
Yes,
we're used
yeah.
to that. You know, we're used to having to, you know, demonstrate compliance to an authority annually or whatever it might be. We're audited to death, even in non-regulated domains. So, you know, airlines, we work for airlines. Airlines audit us, and they audit us against industry standards, which include the majority of the content of the rules that we're developing at the moment. So we're already used to having frequent conversations and demonstrating compliance about training and about standards and about SMS and all of that. So it's not entirely new. And I think just finally, I think Dave touched on this, those of us that are kind of larger global organizations already have this. And I think it's probably more of a challenge for perhaps some smaller organizations which maybe haven't had that regulatory scrutiny. But I think, you know, don't forget we're audited and assured and inspected to death already.
Yes.
Regulated or not regulated.
The regulators.
Not by regulators usually.
Yes,
yeah. But by airports and by airlines.
Yes, yeah. I'm going to come to Enrique's question next. Daniela, as the ground handling chairperson of the European Transport Workers Federation, Enrique asked the question that airports with healthy social sustainability measures in place have suffered much less than those where open competition applies, for example, Spain and Italy. Do you think that the transfer of staff measures put in place homogeneously throughout the EU will lead to a better resilience for the ground handling business?
Yes, definitely yes. And the examples that Enrique Carmona was saying, so Spain has a regulation about the transfer of staff. Italy has not a regulation, but it's social partners that fixed it. It still has to work on it, but it proved to be better, so people were not laid off, and that's it. So for sure, I think that transfer of staff measures should be more homogeneous. It should be kept because this is the social aspect. And we were talking about, I don't know if we mentioned like a passport, the handling passport or whatever, like a license that you have to have. That is another measure. So also you are someone that knows the job. When another handler takes over, you need to go to the other handler with the things you had. So without having a race to the bottom on this and social dumping. So
that's interesting. So what you're suggesting is that you won't have a ground handling FCL or like a crew license. You're going to have a passport?
I just said passport just because we have nothing, but
and how would that work, Fabio?
It's very much like I mentioned before, the driving license. You know,
yes.
In the end, if you have a driving license that is from France, you can drive in Italy and what have you. I mean, it's recognized there, even though it's not coming from the authority that you're driving. In. We're saying it, and I'm saying really we because this is a term that with IATA, with ACI, with ETF and other colleagues, we really are all in favor of, in want of a better term, and insofar as we need to still define this and how it will work, we call it a passport, because the idea is to say you have credentials,
yes,
you have a life past that must be recognized,
yes,
can be transferred.
No Cinderella.
Yeah. Ivan?
When we introduced the reduction of the number of licenses back in 2016 in Fiumicino, actually there were companies that had to exit the market because they didn't got the license awarded. The transition was done without the loss of any single job.
Yes.
Okay? That was done not through law, but through social partnership. Okay? So if you establish the right, proportion, well-studied regulatory framework, that kind of partnership or cooperation can actually happen, okay, and brings improvement.
Yes.
To the whole system.
Yes. Yeah. And Ivan, as the Chief Aviation Officer at Aeroporti di Roma, from your perspective, I'm not going to ask the ground handling providers. The question that Michael asks here is: are ground handling providers willing to push back on airlines vying ground handling demands? For example, yes, no wing walkers, and adopt standardization ways of working at all EU airports. We heard yesterday from the Prague airport operator that there's 24 ways to put cones around an Airbus A320. I spoke last night over a refreshment with Dave that some airlines require 3 cones at a wingtip as opposed to 1, or maybe 1 with a flag. What's your perspective from an airport operator on that question?
Well, I think we all know in the industry that when there is a well-conceived safety standard or operative standard, we all benefit. Okay, so we really need to push forward on the way of standardization, and especially minimum safety standards.
Yes, yeah.
Not only in operations, but also in training. I mean, I strongly believe in the importance of training to promote the right safety culture in an organization.
Yeah. And just to put the ground handling service providers on the spot, are you willing to push back with airliners, Swissport and WFS?
Yes. Now, the word standard is fantastic. When you have one standard, it's good. We all recognise it, we all work to it. Here's the difference. Every airline will say, I am standard, I have my standard. When I handle 30 airlines, each with a different standard, it's no longer a standard, it's many standards, many complexities, and you have to train people 25 ways to position cones. What are we trying to do? We're trying to make things safer, simpler, better for our employees. So part of this opportunity to no longer be the Cinderella but be at the party gives us the opportunity to collaborate with the air operators and say, let's all work to the one single standard, and if that standard needs improving or adjusting, let's change it.
Yes, yeah.
So absolutely, and it gives us the opportunity to have these conversations to build in collaboration the correct standards.
Yes.
So yes, we will engage with all of our customers.
And will the new ground handling regulation from EASA, will that help standardization?
It won't harm it, and in fact, as under anybody's SMS, it requires, it's a collaborative SMS.
Yes.
So you should be considering and communicating with all the stakeholders to make sure that what's in there is going to be effective and make a difference.
Okay, thank you. David, what's your perspective on the question that we got about the pooling of ground service equipment for safety and sustainability and the space savings and innovation and the maintenance aspects?
Yeah, I mean, we don't do a lot of that in Europe. We are involved in some US projects on it. I think we've only seen a benefit where that's available, as long as the equipment is, well looked after, well maintained. But I mean, I know David would be able to talk more about the example in Luton in the UK, which I think was one of the trailblazers on this. Some absolutely logical benefits of this, where you're cutting down the number of movements of a pushback tractor enormously. You're not moving your pushback tractor from one side of the airport to the next flight, or across to the maintenance base or whatever. You have equipment where you need it at the right time and the right number, and everyone does benefit from that. So I think for all the reasons on the question, I think we it's something that we do support. It has to be done sensibly. It has to be monitored, but it's a logical solution.
Okay, thank you. We've got 5 minutes to go. We're on final approach. The question, is there a European-wide data on the number and type of ground handling accidents, injuries and damage? Before I hand it over to maybe Fabio, I certainly know, if you look at the opinion that's been published by EASA and the work that the panelists have made with the rulemaking task force, there's certainly lots of data there on incidents and accidents. Thankfully, there's been no fatalities since 2017, I believe, in ground handling, which is good news. There has been some serious incidents. Hopefully this regulation will tidy that up. Any perspective on that, Fabio?
Yeah, a few. So there are a number of initiatives. Some are locally driven. We've heard from Ivan that they're obviously looking at compiling data with respect to safety locally in Rome, but it's also the case in other airports. So this is one. EASA is doing its own called IDX instruments to measure, ground damage. At EASA, we are doing a similar exercise, trying to see how we can measure and in which way we can measure ground damage, and try and benchmark it with the idea of showing in an anonymized way the rest of the industry versus what the ground handling company is doing, and that's called SID, S-I-D. And of course, at European levels, there are things like ECARS and what have you.
Yep.
So there are various ways. The big question will be, it's always the same question, are we measuring apples and apples? And can we talk to each other? Because in the end, what you're measuring, it's good, but if what you're measuring says X, and then what the others are measuring says Y, you've got a problem here. So,
Yes, yeah.
So we need to make sure that we are all integrated somehow, and this is taking some time because it's quite difficult. But yes, the short answer is yes.
Yeah. Dave?
I'd love to play that question back to the regulators in the room. Do you have data on the number of ground handling accidents, injuries, and damage? That's the important question.
Well, I can take the lead from the Irish NA perspective. We do. Yeah, it's published in our annual report.
Great.
Yeah.
And that's a good starting point because we can watch the needles move.
Yeah. I'll share that data with you as well.
And are they available, these data?
Pardon me?
Are they available publicly?
They are, yes, yeah. We can share them. We can share them, yeah. Our safety report is, yes. Daniela?
Just something, jump in, just to see how airports are a single system, and it's not, we don't have to act as silos, not, ground handlers, airport providers, and airlines, and whatever. We have to work together. So just to give this, because social is not a word that is often heard in the regulation, but social leads to safety. Yeah. Just to say it again.
Well, Daniela, I'd like to conclude. Now we've landed, we're taxiing into the stand. And I'd like to give the last say to you as the representative of the European Transport Workers Federation. We've heard enough over the last day the importance of looking after our people in ground handling. And here's a question from Robert, which I think is important in the context of the sustainable environment. And it's the question, can EASA help to establish a healthy working environment for workers at European level? I think it just jumped to the top. Can EASA help to establish a healthy working environment for workers at European airports at a short notice, meaning no exposure to toxic fumes from engine exhaust anymore? If not, what are the alternatives to protect the workers on airside from today?
It will not be short. For sure, we're working on it. We've been working on this as ETF for years, maybe 5 or 7 or 6 years, finding out that there are many toxic particles, and there's a lot to do. I think the first step is something like what Ivan was saying, trying to start from the small things, trying to get everything electric or HVO, anything this could help to improve health issues. But then we also have aircraft, and aircraft should be towed out and not when they push back in a safe area, so people will not have to breathe what they do if they turn around. So these things have been done in some airports like Copenhagen, something in Amsterdam, and I think this is one of the way forward.
Okay, so it's 10:30. We're on stand. The parking break is on. I'd like to thank you all for your engagement. I think we've got through a lot of the questions, obviously not all of them, but hopefully they might pop up some sustainable questions in the next sessions. I'd like sincerely to thank Fabio, Daniela, Dave, David, and Ivan for your expert contributions. It's been a fascinating topic. I think now we're seeing the last bit of the jigsaw in that ecosystem that we spoke about coming into place. Congratulate the EASA for the work on the ground handling. Please engage with the EASA in terms of your feedback. So Patrick and his when we come back to our next conference in next year, that we have a very positive output from the engagement with industry on this new ground handling regulations. Please give a warm congratulations to our panel. Once again, Fabio, Daniela, Dave, David, and Ivan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to everybody from the panel. Just before we break, we're planning a change in the timetable for this afternoon. We're planning to cut back lunch so that, sorry, I'm in a picture I shouldn't be in. We're planning to cut back the lunch hour so that we'll finish half an hour earlier, so resuming the conference at 1300. This is really just to allow for people who have earlier departures to be able to be with us for as long as possible. The aim will be to actually wind up the conference then at around 1500. So I'll give you that information again when we actually get to the lunch break, but just to let you know now. So we're about to break, just two small things. If you haven't checked out yet, then please check out, because the time for that is actually 11 o'clock. And could the panel 4 speakers please all come to the front and gather here so they can get their microphones and things like that. Please be back at 11 o'clock so that we can start promptly again and keep to the timetable. Thank you very much.